Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. The governor's energy plan is our topic today. You can join our discussion by calling us at 1-877-PA6-5001, or you can text us at 717-219-4001. But first, we're joined by John Cole from the PA Capitol Star. Welcome to our program, John. You filed a story with the headline, Casey and McCormick agreed to 3 debates in PA U.S. Senate race. Which candidate took the initiative to make this happen, and how did he do it?
So with the primary election now in the rearview mirror, we can formally look forward to the general election and all the things that come with that. And of course, what comes to mind are debates. So U.S. Senator Bob Casey, the Democrat who is seeking a 4th term in office, his campaign sent out a press release on Thursday formally announcing that Senator Casey had agreed to participating in 3 debates in the state, 1 in Pittsburgh, 1 in Harrisburg, and 1 in Philadelphia. After his campaign sent out that press release, I reached out to McCormick's campaign. David McCormick is the Republican candidate for U.S. Senate challenging Senator Casey. I followed up and asked the McCormick campaign if they had agreed to those debates that they were going to take place. McCormick's campaign responded via social media saying, we'll be there. Mm-hmm. So we now know that although we are months away from the general election, it's good to see that both candidates have agreed to participating in 3 debates prior to the November general election.
Let's consider those locations, John, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Harrisburg. And what's the strategy behind selecting those cities? And will one candidate do especially well in one city versus another?
Both very fair questions. So to your first one, Larry, I think, of course, as we know, to those in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia in the southeast, Pittsburgh out in the western half of the state, and then Harrisburg in the middle. So you're hitting 3 different media markets, and there's 3 different type of the electorate. So certainly to get your message out there, I think, this is a big state. There are 67 counties. It would be wise for any candidate for statewide office to not just focus on one region. So therefore, that is the strategy behind participating in debates in various regions of the Commonwealth. To your second question about will certain candidates participate or do well or do better than the other in certain areas, I think that's pretty standard in every election. Democrats, by and large, have done well in the big cities, and Republicans in recent years, of course, have done well in rural areas. So even though, again, let's say, the Philadelphia market, of course, includes Philadelphia, the biggest Democratic city in the state. However, the Philadelphia media market, and mind you, these debates are in the media markets, that include some of the suburbs that maybe, even if they're left-leaning, they're a little more, there's more swing voters there. The Harrisburg region certainly is not as blue as the Philadelphia area, but you have your fair amount of red and blue voters there. And same thing with Western PA, even though Pittsburgh is a Democratic city and Allegheny County votes Democratic by and large, the Pittsburgh media market encompasses counties outside of there, Washington County, Westmoreland, Greene, et cetera, that are red counties. So it's important for them to go on television in these areas to talk to all voters.
John, I know it's still early, but what do we know about the terms of the debate? In other words, the format or the issues that may be covered?
Another good question that we do not have all the final details on yet, since they just kind of formally announced on Thursday that they will be participating in these debates. We will see those details come out, I'd imagine, in the following weeks and months as they hash it out, because they have to decide who the TV station is going to be, who are the moderators going to be. But I'd imagine it'll be pretty standard from past year's debates, whether it be a 60-minute or 90-minute debate. And usually when you have these debates, usually you cover a wide range of issues. Usually they're not focused on one topic. Usually to give the electorate an idea of where they stand on a bevy of issues, a lot of questions will be asked there. And again, it's worth noting where usually leading into a U.S. Senate race, there are multiple debates, usually is the standard practice in Pennsylvania. In 2022 was maybe one of the rare exceptions where John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz only debated once. But beyond that, the last time that Senator Casey was on the ballot in 2018, he participated in 2 debates with then Republican challenger Lou Barletta. So usually we see more than one debate. We will see all the details hashed out, I believe, in the coming weeks and months, but I would expect it, to be at least 60 minutes or maybe 90 minutes, and they would cover a wide range of topics.
Well, John, given your experience covering this race, which topics do you expect to be center stage or rise to the top? Just some predictions on your part.
Sure. So again, these are just predictions. I'm certainly not going to tell you. I don't know who the moderator is and the exact questions, but I'd imagine they look at they will look at the statewide polling, and there's a ton of that coming out to see what issues Pennsylvanians are going to care about as they cast their ballot. So I'm sure that we're going to hear a good amount about economic policy. What do they think of current economic policy? Is it, is the state trending in the right or wrong direction? So I imagine we'll hear a lot about economic policy. I'm sure we'll hear about abortion policy as well. After the Dobbs decision, we have seen that abortion policy take center stage, so to speak, in a lot of these statewide races. So I'd expect economic issues, some social issues as well. And of course, not to neglect foreign affairs as well. I think we will hear a good amount about international affairs as well and see where the candidates stand on, funding for its various foreign conflicts.
John, last question. Any indication on how soon the dates for the 3 debates will be determined?
So we do not have those final details yet, but I'd imagine these debates, and I think it's a safe assumption, these debates will not take place until the fall, where I know it's only April now, and it's good to have the candidates on the same page that they want to participate in 3 debates. However, we won't see these as long as, tradition would tell you that these debates will be after the summer, and then the campaign really seems to pick up after Labor Day. So I'd imagine September and October they will start to take place. We'll probably find the dates out, I would say, in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you, John Cole from the PA Capitol Star.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
More PCN Capitol Preview after a short break. Welcome back. Our guests are André Béliveau, Senior Manager of Energy Policy for the Commonwealth Foundation, and Robert Routh, State Policy Director for the Natural Resources Defense Council. Robert, we'll start with you. What goals should be considered as Pennsylvania shapes its energy policy?
Well, thank you, Larry, and thanks to those who are watching. Pennsylvania has always been a leader when it comes to energy innovation and energy production. Currently, Pennsylvania is the 2nd largest natural gas producing state in the country, the 3rd largest coal producing state, and 2nd in terms of generating capacity from nuclear power. So Pennsylvania is an energy powerhouse, and it is poised, has the opportunity to become a leader in the clean energy economy. As we grow a more affordable, cleaner economy for all, I think Governor Shapiro has actually laid out a smart 3-part test for climate and energy policy that has guided his administration thus far. And I think those are good goals to keep in mind for all of us. And so that 3-part test means taking real action on climate change, protecting and creating energy jobs, and ensuring long-term affordability of power for Pennsylvania consumers. So if you can enact energy policy that achieves all 3 of those goals in that 3-part test, I think you're on the right track.
What do you think, André? What goals should be considered as PA shapes its energy policy?
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for having me on this morning. And I agree in part with what Robert was saying. I mean, Pennsylvania is an energy powerhouse. I mean, we have an abundance of natural resources that we can monopolize on in such a powerful way. As he rightly says, I mean, Pennsylvania is we're the 2nd largest producer of natural gas in the United States. We're the largest energy exporter in the United States. So we have an advantage here in Pennsylvania of what we can do for energy policy if we allow the market to continue on its great successes, and if we have good policies that allow the energy industry to continue on its great successes, to continue to deliver reliable and increasingly clean energy and power to Pennsylvania citizens. Where I disagree a little bit with Robert is on the characterization of Governor Shapiro's policies, at least the ones that we're currently seeing come out of the administration. I think the Pennsylvania energy industry is delivering. They're delivering reliable power for Pennsylvanians. Our current, the current grid where we're getting power from is reliable. So currently, our grid reliability is in a really good place. But unfortunately, there are policies that are coming, whether it's policies coming from the current administration here in Pennsylvania or from the administration federally, we're seeing policies that could damage the progress that we're seeing that the Pennsylvania energy sector is doing, not only in delivering reliable power, but increasingly clean. Our energy industry is already delivering on a lot of the goals that Governor Shapiro is looking to do. We're decreasing our carbon emissions while we're actually increasing energy generation. So I think Pennsylvania, being an energy powerhouse, is on a good track so long as government can get out of the way from doing what it's doing and doing it well.
Robert, what do you think? Let's consider the environment some more. What kind of progress has been made, in your opinion, in making Pennsylvania's PA carbon footprint smaller?
It's a great question. And I think the story, for the most part, over the past decade in Pennsylvania has been that of one fossil fuel displacing another. So in the 2000s, Pennsylvania derived most of its electricity generation from coal. And now coal produces roughly 10% of PA electricity in state, and natural gas has displaced that, and it's now responsible for nearly 3/5 of our electricity production here in PA. So while natural gas burns cleaner than coal at the smokestack, its carbon intensity is lesser than coal when combusted. The primary constituent of natural gas is methane, an extremely potent greenhouse gas that's more than 87 times as efficient at trapping heat than carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And methane leaks across every segment of the oil and gas supply chain. So those methane emissions have historically been undercounted and are often left out in the story of what's taken place in terms of the carbon footprint from Pennsylvania's electric sector over the past decade. And as I mentioned, coal is now responsible for just 10% of our in-state generation. By 2028, the 4 remaining large conventional coal-fired power plants in Pennsylvania have stated they will either retire or attempt to fuel switch to gas. So we're simply running out of coal plants to replace with gas. And burning gas still emits carbon dioxide. So absent any policy changes from the electric sector, like a bold cap and invest program such as RGGI or PACER, or like an enhanced clean energy standard like with PRESS, you're going to see those emission reductions that have taken place plateau and then start to increase once again, even with the once-in-a-lifetime historic investment opportunities from the federal government with the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. So that's what's taken place over the past 10 years. And the trajectory of what will continue to take place if we just stick with the status quo. And something you heard Governor Shapiro and members of the head of the Pennsylvania Building Trades, NRDC's Director of State Power Sector Policy, and the Pennsylvania Consumer Advocate all say last month in rolling out the governor's PACER and PRESS plans, inaction is simply not an option.
How much emphasis, André, have you seen the Shapiro administration put on energy in general?
Well, I mean, there's certainly energy behind their energy policies. Obviously, I think there's a push, I think, to a desire to do something. I mean, Robert mentioned the one quote from Governor Shapiro saying, like, doing nothing is not an option. I mean, the reality is that, I mean, our energy sector is doing something. I mean, some of the policies that Robert's mentioned, like PACER or even RGGI and PRESS, I mean, these are solutions in search of a problem. Our independent fiscal office has already demonstrated, as has already been said, we've decreased our carbon emissions by almost 11% in a year-to-year from 2022 to 2023. I think it was 10.8%. The IFO said we decreased carbon emissions, and we did that, as they mentioned, from the transition from coal to natural gas. So the energy sector is already delivering on reducing carbon emissions. So this is IFO data. And we did that while increasing generation. So we're producing more power while decreasing our carbon emissions. I mean, that's a good success story. And I think what we're seeing with some of these policies is, I mean, they're having a chilling effect on the industry. I mean, if you're already delivering on carbon emissions and you already have a market incentive, not only from a social capital perspective, but also from your shareholders and investors to be increasingly clean, like natural gas has been doing in the energy sector more broadly, I mean, this kind of seems like you're being punished for delivering on things that you're doing. And we could talk about things like cap and trade. I mean, what those do. I mean, they do really three main things. One, they impact the industry and prevent us from being able to build more facilities that are going to replace retiring facilities. We talk about retiring coal. I mean, once we start retiring these facilities that are providing baseload and dispatchable power, our grid operators are going to find themselves in a reliability crisis. You're not going to have the energy capacity to replace retiring facilities. And we're going to need natural gas in order to replace baseload and dispatchable power. And that's something that intermittent sources like renewables cannot just do at the same scale. I mean, that means we're going to need more natural gas. We're going to need more nuclear. We're, of course, going to need renewables to be part of a diversified grid. But renewables are not the Band-Aid solution across the entire country. These solutions that you think, they have to be focused on the region that you're in. So what is Pennsylvania's role, right? What can we do to help reduce carbon emissions? What can we do to help the climate? But we have to look at these things holistically, right? You have to look at the policies that are going to be about holistic forms of human flourishing. The climate is obviously part of that. And our natural environment is part of that, but so is our economic environment. So things like RGGI, PACER, and PRESS, these are economy-wide energy taxes that are going to be placed. I mean, energy prices are going to go up. And the second prong of this, I mean, you're going to lose energy sector jobs. And then also, I mean, the current, on PJM right now, energy sources that are looking to go on the grid, I think it's like 97% of what's in the queue are intermittent sources or renewables. That they simply cannot replace baseload or dispatchable sources. And I agree. I think the energy sector is of course, we're going to lead towards technologies that are going to be increasingly clean. Renewable technologies are going to get much better. But we have to look at what is our technology right now? What's our technology going to be in the next decade? And we need to make sure that when you flip the switch, the lights come on. And we need to make sure that in peak winter, your heat pumps are going to work. So I think we have to look at this question. Climate is certainly a part of this, and environmental policy is certainly a part of this, but we have to look at the holistic elements of human flourishing. And again, that's going to include economic questions, it's going to include grid reliability questions, and of course, environmental questions.
André, I took note of the three government programs you mentioned, RGGI, sometimes known as RGGI, PRESS, PRESS, and PACER, PACER, and we know there's no shortage of abbreviations and acronyms in government. We're going to break that down in a minute. But first, Robert, would you consider for us how important is energy policy in general to voters?
I think the most tangible day-to-day impact is something that André alluded to. When you flip on the light switch, you want to make sure that you get power. So energy policy and the way in which, our regional transmission organization, PJM, which covers a footprint of parts of all of 13 different states in the District of Columbia, the way they structure their day-ahead energy market, their spot market, their capacity markets, these might seem obscure and not something that voters are paying attention to on a day-to-day basis, but they'll sure notice if they don't have the lights come on when they want them to. So
you've made the point, Robert, that voters ought to think this is important, but maybe some of them just don't, and they take it for granted that the lights will come on when they flip the switch.
I don't want to, overgeneralize what the sort of amount of attention and the depth of policy interest that the average voter might have in programs like RGGI or PACER or PRESS, but it is something that is intrinsic to our modern society and something that voters will notice if the policy goes wrong.
Mm-hmm. Larry, can I address that question?
You may.
Actually? So we conducted some independent polling at the Commonwealth Foundation on a lot of, specifically on energy, and asked Pennsylvania voters, bipartisan across the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, what they thought about energy policy. And overwhelming bipartisan supermajority of Pennsylvanians believe the number one energy issue for them, number one, is cost. They currently believe that their electric bills are rising, and any policy that they believe or that they see is going to increase their costs, they're not for it. And the numbers are overwhelming of Pennsylvania voters. That is their number one issue, and they're also not willing to pay more for green or climate action policies that they see are going to increase their bills. Now, that's not to say that Pennsylvanians don't care about the environment. They do, because we asked them that. Okay, if you're not willing to pay more for these green or these climate policies, so-called green and climate policies, what would you do? They're willing to take individual steps in their everyday lives. They're willing to do things in their homes, make energy choices that are more efficient. They're willing to take steps in their lives. What they want is they want less government regulation. They want less government red tape. They want energy choice and the freedom to make those kind of economic decisions. And what the role for government then should be is to make sure that we have a grid that's reliable. I think everybody agrees that we want clean water, we want clean air. Everyone, I think that these are things that everybody, I think, believes good intentions here. Everybody wants that, and there are policies that we can do that ensure that. And I think government's responsibility is to make sure that anything we do to make sure that we have a reliable grid, make sure it's increasingly clean, is that the energy sources we bring do not jeopardize grid reliability and adequacy. That's number one. And that number two, that we're doing this at least cost to ratepayers. There are ways that we can do that in Pennsylvania, and the way that we do that in Pennsylvania is going to be different than the way they do that in California or Texas or Florida. Policies in Pennsylvania are going to be different. And I think if our goal is, again, only focused on one element of this myriad of policies that we have to do for human flourishing, if it's only focused on carbon emissions, we're missing the mark. We have to look at every single element of policy and how that's going to impact everyday life for not just Pennsylvanians, but for Americans and really, anyone in the world who has to deal with energy and have to breathe the air.
Robert, Governor Shapiro says that we should reject the false choice between energy jobs and protecting the planet. We should do both. How do you respond?
I think he's right on. I don't think that is that those two goals should not be considered at odds with each other. They are complementary, and it is not a choice that we have to face. So I think the governor has been consistent throughout his time in office, where he has described himself as an all-of-the-above energy governor, and one who, again, wants to ensure that Pennsylvania attracts every single penny of federal funds that have been made available through the IRA and BIL, more acronyms for you, and use those and invest those in ways to make sure that Pennsylvania is a leader in the developing clean energy economy. André mentioned that the people of Pennsylvania have across the board an expectation of clean air and pure water. There's also a fundamental constitutional right guaranteed to them by Article 1, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And certainly costs are going to be top of mind for ratepayers. And it's worth mentioning that a full clean energy transition is the only way to guarantee predictable and affordable energy supplies that are insulated from global price shocks. As long as America and the people of Pennsylvania are dependent largely on fossil fuels, then our consumers are going to be subject to the volatility and the price swings that come with these increasingly globally traded commodities like oil and gas. So increasing investment in renewables wouldn't just strengthen American energy independence and lower costs. It also makes America and Pennsylvania less reliant on international fossil fuel demand, and that helps prop up economies like Russia or Venezuela. So it's important to secure a stable and clean domestic energy supply, which will lower costs. And to the point you made about the quote from Governor Shapiro, grow jobs.
Go ahead, André.
Yeah, I have to fundamentally disagree with a lot of that. I'll start with where we agree. I agree actually with what you said. Governor Shapiro said at the beginning. I don't think we have to sacrifice these things. I think the energy sector is already delivering on increasingly clean, reliable energy for Pennsylvanians. We are when you talk about the fluctuating prices, we have an economic advantage. People say we sit on the Saudi Arabia of North America in Pennsylvania. Robert talked about international fossil fuels. What about the fossil fuels we have here at home? We're sitting on an abundance of natural gas resources. Not only that, but ours is incredibly more clean than natural gas that are coming from other parts of the world. We should monopolize on that. We have the ability to provide reliable.
Did you say our natural gas is cleaner than others?
So yeah, I mean the Pennsylvania
Why is
gas,
that?
the way it's produced. I mean, because we're conscious about our carbon footprint in the way that other countries are. And I mean, it's not just this. The idea of a clean energy transition is already happening. The market is delivering to that. People want things to be clean, but 80% of the world's energy comes from fossil fuels. And if you want to talk about costs, I mean, expediting arbitrarily the market towards not only things away from that, but things that are not as reliable. Renewable sources as they exist today these are intermittent sources. They're not providing the same quality and adequacy of power that baseload and dispatchable sources like natural gas and nuclear, by the way, provide. I mean, and nuclear is the most reliable, carbon-free emitting source that we have, and nuclear absolutely has to play a role here. But like everything else, there's permitting problems that make that almost impossible or extremely difficult. And the things that are making our economic are the economics around things like natural gas so volatile. It's policies like RGGI, it's policies like PACER, it's policies from the Biden administration like stopping LNG transports. All of these things are going to, of course, fluctuate prices. So we can make smart policy decisions that are making that are going to make not only electricity but energy more affordable overall.
As promised, gentlemen, let's get into those government programs with the abbreviations and the acronyms. And let's start with PACER, PACER. And simply put, it's the governor's plan that makes power plants pay for greenhouse gas emissions after a limit is exceeded. So a fundamental question comes out right away. Will this policy reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Robert, let's start with you.
So I'll talk about the PACER, the Pennsylvania Climate Emissions Reduction Act, in just 1 minute. I just wanted to say that the point of Pennsylvania sitting on top, as Saudi Arabia of shale gas, Pennsylvania only consumes about a quarter of the natural gas that it produces here. So 3/4 of it gets shipped out of state. And the line about how the abundance of gas from the Marcellus shale should all result in benefits to the people of Pennsylvania has been disproven by reports from think tanks like the Ohio River Valley Institute, something that should be made available to viewers after the fact. But that's just the point about the fossil fuel resources that we have available to us has not translated to lower costs or greater job growth for the people here, because for the most part, we're exporting the vast majority of what we extract. But in terms of PACER,
yeah, please.
The governor's proposal, which is a result of him acting on recommendations from a working group that he established on the campaign trail. He committed to bringing a diverse set of stakeholders together to evaluate Pennsylvania's participation in RGGI. You've mentioned this before, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, a remarkably successful cap and invest program that 11 of our neighboring states have participated in since 2009. He wanted to bring a diverse set of stakeholders together to evaluate RGGI participation through the lens of his 3-part test that I mentioned near the top of the show. How to take real action on climate, how to create and grow energy jobs, and how to ensure long-term affordable power. And his working group, which was co-chaired by a retired leader of the IBEW in Pittsburgh, and by Jackson Morris, my colleague, the NRDC Director of State Power Sector Policy. It included members of the environmental advocacy groups. It included organized labor leaders. It included consumer advocates, and it included representatives from the energy industry.
Excuse me, Robert. Our time is limited. Let's get back to my original question, which was, will the governor's PACER plan reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Just a basic, fundamental thing to think about.
That is the intent of the program. Yes. And,
is there reason to believe it would work?
We have not seen legislative text yet, but given that it was, again, this is an outgrowth of the RGGI Working Group's recommendations, and if it is a Pennsylvania-specific cap and invest program that can deliver comparable benefits to Pennsylvania than that RGGI would, then yes, absolutely, it will drive
now,
down
you're just so our viewers don't get confused, you're overlapping PACER and RGGI. RGGI is the federal project that's tied up in court currently, and the governor is offering his PACER plan as something that he would like to work out in-house is what it amounts to, because he'd like the legislature to address that. How about that, André? Have you been watching that?
I have been watching that, and I mean, I think the governor has. I mean, I'm sure he has good intentions. I'm sure, and he has good goals. And if the sole goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to your question, could that work? Sure, lots of things could work, but there's trade-offs to everything. And the question is it necessary, right? And I would say right now it is not necessary. I would say that our energy industry is already reducing carbon emissions. I think the trade-offs with something like PACER or with RGGI is an economy-wide energy tax. People are going to see their energy costs go up. I mean, the governor concedes this point. I mean, I think 70% of PACER is going to go back to rebates. So, I mean, why would you need the rebates unless he's anticipating the energy prices are going to go up? And I think Pennsylvanians are going to get hit in the pocketbook. And so I mean, we're already seeing progress on our carbon emissions. And I think doing something that is not needed at the moment, that is only going to jeopardize jobs, increase costs, and potentially, when you pair it with his policy like press, you have the potential to go into a grid reliability crisis. I just don't see the trade-offs there.
What do you think of that, Robert? Are the current goals in place for reducing greenhouse gases sufficient without going to PACER or RGGI?
Absent any power sector policies like a bold cap and invest program such as PACER or enhanced clean energy targets, no, our trajectory is insufficient to mitigate the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And the reason to connect RGGI and PACER, to tell that story about the RGGI working group, is simply that PACER is an outgrowth of the governor bringing together a group, a diverse set of stakeholders who disagreed with one another about the ultimate benefits of RGGI participation. Nevertheless, they did reach a historic consensus amongst themselves that a cap and invest program for the power sector that generates revenue to support the ongoing energy transition for Pennsylvania, that's the optimal way forward. So that is what ultimately led the governor to propose PACER, which, again, details are still to be determined. We've not seen legislative text yet. With most things in Harrisburg, the devil will be in the details. But if it's intended to be structured in a manner that is similar to RGGI, or if it delivers comparable benefits that allows Pennsylvania to chart its own course in terms of energy policy, then it will absolutely deliver on the governor's goals. So,
André, Robert, André Béliveau and Robert Routh. Thank you, because we're just going to give you a break for a minute while we look at program notes for PCN. On the Issues has Representative Ryan Warner on his proposal to ban sanctuary cities. That's Wednesday at 7 p.m. Then we'll have Carol Cunningham, co-founder and chair of Fair Districts PA, tell us about the latest on redistricting at 7:30 p.m. A Journalist Roundtable has Charles Thompson from Penn Live, Dennis Owens from ABC 27, and Pat Loeb from KYW News Radio. They'll be here Thursday at 7 p.m. Indoor football comes to PCN once again. The Harrisburg Stampede will take on the Jersey Bearcats, production courtesy of the Sports Fan Base Network. That's on Sunday at 12 noon. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free on the internet. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is a 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no government funding. We rely on viewers and donors like you to help PCN bring you everything Pennsylvania. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Now, we were talking about the governor's plan, about greenhouse gases and the PACER program, and then we often interchange that with RGGI, the RGGI program, which I pointed out is tied up in court currently. And what could happen to the RGGI plan? How soon might something happen in the court?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think we're waiting to see when the court is going to take it up. I don't know what the court's docket looks like, but I think we're all sort of waiting with bated breath for when that is going to happen. But
and what is the issue for the court, by the way?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, that's a great point about I think why Governor Shapiro felt the need to go to Pacers. We have to remember fundamentally. Let's get outside the realm of energy policy for a second. Why we're here? Why Pacer might be necessary? It's because Reggie was unconstitutional. I mean, the Governor Wolf unilaterally made a decision. Taking the power of the purse away from the legislature to make a decision by executive fiat to put Pennsylvania into Reggie. So whether we agree or disagree, whether Reggie is good policy or bad policy, it was implemented in a way that's unconstitutional, and that's the question before the court. So when we really think why is Pacer necessary, it's necessary because Reggie didn't work because it was done unconstitutionally. So I'm at least glad that Governor Shapiro is asking the legislature to bring a bill. And again, like as Robert said, the details will be when we actually see what bill language looks like from the legislature. Because of course, the legislature, the people's elected representatives, are the ones that should be setting policy. For the state. I mean, one thing I'll point about Reggie and this supposed need for a cap and trade system. I mean, we've seen quite frankly, Reggie's not working in Reggie states. I mean, let's look as an example of New York. I mean, New York just is closing its nuclear facilities. They've closed Indian Point, and their carbon emissions went up. That's a Reggie state. And a lot of these Reggie states have had to, because of the reliance on intermittent sources like renewables, they have to beef up more other sources, sometimes coal in some places, or they're exporting fuel from other places, which is of course bringing in the impacting the carbon footprint. So I'm not seeing the success story from Reggie, not only economically, but in its goal supposedly of reducing carbon emissions. And again, we just have to look at New York for one example.
What about you, Robert? Are you seeing any success stories in the Reggie states that have entered into this compact?
Yes, and it's a cooperative arrangement between 11 Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states that has been in existence since 2009. Each state has structured its own CO2 budget trading program or Reggie regulation under its respective state laws and state constitution. They simply design the programs to be sufficiently similar to one another that they can that the regulated entities, fossil fuel generating power plants, can trade allowances across state lines. And there's a great report from a nonprofit, the Acadia Center, that was looking back on the previous decade of Reggie's success, and they had cut carbon pollution nearly in half within those states. Electricity prices had fallen within the Reggie states, whereas costs had risen elsewhere in the country. And it showed remarkable GDP growth. So that those materials can be easily accessible. Again, there's several things I'd like to see if they can be made available to the viewers or through PCN after the show. But and your question about the court, yes, there has been an appeal taken by the Shapiro administration to the state Supreme Court. We are awaiting a briefing schedule and argument to take place. The justices can do that at any time. And the central nature of the case is whether or not Reggie constitutes a tax or a fee. So fundamentally disagree respectfully with André about the constitutionality and lawfulness of the state's Reggie regulation. That's the very issue that the parties are arguing and will argue before the state Supreme Court. That can play out over the course of this year, but there's no strict timeline that sets forth when the justices have to get to the case. But yes, Reggie was enacted through regulation through the customary state regulatory process, which takes over 2 years. It involved hours and hours worth of public hearings hosted by the agency, thousands and thousands of public comments that were submitted, overwhelmingly in support of Pennsylvania participation in Reggie. And the rulemaking was authorized by an existing statute passed by the General Assembly and signed into law, the Air Pollution Control Act, which gives our state Department of Environmental Protection the authority to enact rules to abate and control air pollution. So the question before the court is one of tax versus fee, and the Shapiro administration has appealed that decision. And worth noting that while serving as Attorney General, Josh Shapiro approved the Reggie regulation as to form and legality twice separately. It was approved by the Independent Regulatory Review Commission. There were multiple layers of process and opportunities for input and feedback along the way. This was not something where Governor Wolf snapped his fingers one day and Pennsylvania was participating in RGGI. So a mischaracterization of just the extent to which this was developed through public feedback. And then we are awaiting action from the state Supreme Court.
Gentlemen, let's now that we have gone through RGGI, PACER, those government acronyms, there's one left, and that is PRESS, P-R-E-S-S, and it stands for PA Reliable Energy Sustainability Standard. André, give me a brief explanation just what that is, what it requires.
Sure. So what the governor's aiming to do in his press policy is effectively look to reevaluate or reopen our AEPS.
So there's already a law in place.
There's another acronym for you, AEPS, our Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard. In other places, sometimes they're called a Renewable Portfolio Standard. All this is a very similar type of thing in
and
other
that calls
states.
for?
So currently, effectively, what we have is it's set at 8%, and it's the amount of renewables, the amount of our energy utility companies have to take in from renewable sources. So the governor
often referred to as alternative sources.
Often, yes.
And give me an alternative source or two, just for example.
Solar and wind would be, I guess, your classic examples, which I think actually of that 18% is, I think it's only 8% of that 18%. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there's different tiers in the current system. But what the governor wants to do with PRESS is expand that. So he wants to say now 35% can come from what we think of traditional sources like wind and solar, but he's also expanding that to nuclear power, which I think that's actually a good thing. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. There's, I think, 10% set aside for things like hydro and battery storage, and then an additional 5% for what he's called low emissions or clean
ultra
fossil
low
fuels.
Emission fuel. I wonder if you have an example of that.
Yeah, I'm curious. I want to know what he thinks that is. Actually, I mean,
maybe you know, Robert. Do you know what the governor's talking about? Ultra low emission fuel. Do you know of an example?
So we just have the co-sponsor memo that's been released to know what are proposed to be in each of the tiers that André was mentioning for PRESS. And I believe, based on the co-sponsor memo, that's talk about gas-fired power plants that co-fire or blend in hydrogen in order to produce electricity. But don't quote me on that. I should double check the co-sponsor memo. Yeah.
So, Robert, what do you think about the prospect of getting the total of Pennsylvania's energy, 35% of that, from alternative sources?
That's an achievable target, and it would be a quantum leap from where Pennsylvania currently stands. As of now, Pennsylvania generates about 2 to 3% of its electricity from renewable sources. And you mentioned the existing law, the AEPS. That was enacted over 20 years ago, back in 2004. And at the time, it established Pennsylvania as a leader. It set a target that extended out and ramped up over time gradually to 8% of retail electric sales coming from utilities to Pennsylvania consumers must come from mostly renewable sources. And those sources could be available anywhere within the PJM footprint. So that's why there's a discrepancy between what Pennsylvania is producing in-state for renewables and then what the AEPS mandated. But those targets flatlined back in May of 2021. And again, were established over 20 years ago. So I think it's a bold and significant plan that the governor has put forward to ensure that at least 35% of Pennsylvania's power comes from cleaner resources by 2035. And what we know from the co-sponsor memo is that those tier 1 resources will also be eligible for tier 2 and tier 3 credits. So if they can compete effectively with those sources from a cost perspective, utilities could, in theory, meet their 2035 targets by selling up to 50% of electricity from renewables. And small modular nuclear reactors and fusion technology, neither of which have been developed at scale, close to scale in the United States yet. Those are included in tier 1 from the co-sponsor memo. So they will be eligible to try and compete with other more traditional renewable resources too. So it's a bold plan, and it's one that's it's something that the governor campaigned on.
André, here's another one of Governor Shapiro's goals. He wants to get solar power for 50% of state agencies by the year 2027. That's kind of around the corner. How desirable is that? Is it achievable?
Listen. I'm all for limiting government power, but that might be a step too far. I think the government should actually be able to function. And of course, I'm joking because I think that powering with solar and renewables the way that he wants to do, you're not going to guarantee that the lights come on in the government buildings when you want to flip the switch. So let's talk about this fundamentally and incorporate that into press and these AEPS standards. I mean, the truth of the matter is this: I'm glad there's nuclear in there. I mean, nuclear is one of the most reliable carbon-free emitter that we have. As Robert points out, things like SMR technology aren't quite there yet. But when we think about power output and we think about grid reliability, I mean, it would take over 1 million solar panels to put out the same megawatt capacity that one nuclear facility can do. Just as one example. And again, what we're talking about when he says he wants to increase effectively to 35%. I mean, totally, we're looking at a 50% portfolio with what he's proposing in press. Currently, we're getting our resources on the grid. 98% of our grid is from reliable, dispatchable baseload sources. What he's effectively saying is he wants to cut grid reliability in half. This is a pathway. I mean, it's death by 1,000 cuts, whether it's federal policy or state policy. We're going towards a grid reliability crisis. Solar and wind might work in places where there's more sun and the wind is blowing. We have to think about what in our region. I mean, when you're in the second week of January in peak winter and it's a cloudy day out or it's snowing, solar is not going to be there when you call for it. It's an intermittent source. It's not dispatchable. The grid is designed to take dispatchable and baseload sources. That means on demand and getting steady power. And current technology with renewables can't do that. Even with battery storage, utility scale battery storage on average lasts about 4 hours. And when you think about the all-in cost, again, the grid isn't designed to accept these intermittencies. We have to bring transmission lines to where these solar facilities are. That's a cost. You have to add battery storage to try to make it a little bit more reliable. That's an additional cost. And the most economic thing to do is to work with the current system and to advance technology in a reasonable, prudential manner, and not saying we need to expedite into a way that's going to bring us to a grid reliability crisis, which I think press will do.
André, we have about 2 minutes left, and try to take one of those minutes and just summarize what you'd like to see the governor do in the coming months.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think the lawmakers in Pennsylvania really need to stop being government central planners. The energy industry knows what it's doing. It's bringing us reliable, increasingly clean power. There's social capital there that wants that. There's obviously economic incentives for the market to do that. The market is going to deliver far better than government fiat is ever going to do. I think we need an all and above energy approach, absolutely, but one that prioritizes reliability and the one that prioritizes least cost to ratepayers. And that's what Pennsylvania voters want, and it's also good policy.
Robert, you'll have the last word, about 1 minute. What would you like to see transpire as far as energy policy is concerned in the coming weeks?
I think we need to have a robust conversation. Once we see the legislative text for both PACER and press, we need to have a robust conversation in the General Assembly to take action, because as the governor laid out with, again, allies from environmental groups, organized labor, and consumer advocates, inaction is not an option. We have seen what inaction looks like. We have seen fossil plants retire, and we've seen local communities and school districts suffer as a result with no support made available to them. Cap and Invest program would generate proceeds from the sale of allowances, limited licenses to pollute at auction that can be reinvested in Pennsylvania communities to make power more affordable and to protect and create and grow the Pennsylvania workforce. So,
all right, we'll have to end our interview there, Robert. I'm afraid we're out of time. André Béliveau from the Commonwealth Foundation and Robert Routh from the Natural Resources Defense Council, thank you very much. PCN's Ellen France talked to Representative Kyle Mullins about a bill that requires manufacturers of electronic devices to give buyers a better chance at having them repaired.
Welcome to our program. Please give us some background about this bill.
Thank you for having me. So this bill was brought to my attention as something other states were doing. It's a rather common sense measure that we as consumers have a general right to repair. It is an environmentally friendly piece of legislation in that it is keeping so it would keep so many of our devices out of landfills that are at or nearing capacity. It would, of course, make us less of a throwaway culture. but also it is a consumer rights measure that I am always trying to come down on the side of consumers. Of course, we all are connected to these things in our lives, and they are a necessary part of our everyday living in 2024. And I like to think, what would we as automobile drivers and owners do if we didn't have the right to repair, to go to an experienced technician, mechanic shop, to have our car worked on, regardless of the brand or make of the car or the problem. So it is a common sense measure, but I understand the devil is always in the details.
Is there a limit to the type of devices that can be repaired under this bill?
We are still working through those specifics. I know there is when you get into the conversation of the right to repair, you're dealing with a whole host of industries and products. And we, as policymakers, are trying to be sensitive to the nuances across that landscape of farm equipment. We had a recently very productive and informative hearing in the House of Representatives that heard testimony from farm equipment manufacturers, and how if someone were to take it upon themselves to make some sort of adjustment or repair, depending on the type of product or component, there could be a real safety issue posed there. There's also copyright and data security concerns that we are trying to be sensitive to, and not cause any not do any harm via our legislation, particularly unintended harm or unforeseen or cause any unforeseen issues. Also, medical devices, as a for instance, there's patient safety involved there. So that's why the stakeholder process is so vital and critical. We as lawmakers are not experts in these areas. That's why we need to seek input from those individuals, those constituents, those industry experts who are expert in those fields. And that is how you get then to the necessary votes to actually move a piece of legislation.
You mentioned data security. What are some things that this bill will do to make sure that personal information that are saved on these devices is kept safe during the repairs?
Sure. And that is something that we are working through on how to actually address that and craft with the manufacturers of any number of our favorite handheld devices, to ensure that we are not enabling some repair shop to without permission or perhaps even unintentionally commit some invasion of privacy, or inadvertently put that consumer's privacy or personal data at risk, to make sure that the component parts that we are authorizing qualified shops to repair are those component parts that would not touch or endanger the data or the sanctity and privacy of that consumer's data.
How would this legislation affect businesses at all?
I know we've heard from any number of small repair shops. This bill is also a job creation and retention effort, in addition to being environmentally wise and responsible and on the side of consumers. We've heard from repair shops across the state and from other states that are a little further down the road as far as this legislation and enacting similar legislation into law. And there's certainly a welcome posture from those small businesses, and they are if they are qualified and are competent in doing these repairs. I think of a cracked screen that seems that happens to at least everyone I've known, myself included. They should be able to do those repairs without jumping through any number of hoops from a small business perspective, or having to turn them away and make the consumer follow a very long, lengthy, and perhaps expensive process.
Final question, where is this bill in the legislature now?
So there is a Senate bill, and there is what will be my House bill. Right now, the Senate bill has already been introduced, and I believe has been referred to committee over there. Our bill, the language is still being modified to account for all of the considerations that I shared, to make sure that we are not casting too broad or unintended net, so to speak, over industries that might not be the proper fit for this measure. So we're trying to get it right, and then get the words on the page, and ultimately introduce for formal introduction and committee referral, a bill number, and all of that legislative inside baseball that is part of our process. And that's when we try to then get the votes to get it moving.
Representative Kyle Mullins, thank you for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before we go, here's a reminder for you. On the issues has Representative Ryan Warner on his proposal to ban sanctuary cities on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Then we'll have Carol Cunningham, co-founder and chair of Fair Districts PA, tell us about the latest on redistricting at 7:30 p.m. That's it for the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.